What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. You can make an argument for Tanner Engstrand and Steve Wilks that either one of these guys could look to be on the hot seat, get fired, and ultimately get replaced. With Aaron Glenn being the defensive-minded guy that he is, you could say maybe he takes on a bigger role going into next year and gets a DC, right? It'd be a harder conversation to say, can you get an upgrade over Tanner Engstrand? I think he's looked decent enough. Things haven't been consistent, which is also an issue with Steve Wilks, but things you've seen the elite games from Tanner Engstrand. You've seen the performances when Justin Fields has truly been locked in and on point, what that offense can look like, and there were still a ton of missed opportunities. There's some drawbacks, but still, with Steve Wilks, it feels like he is the more obvious candidate for Aaron Glenn to potentially step away from. And I've seen people make the comparison during, again, his Detroit's tenure, where Campbell decided to move on from Anthony Lynn, for example, right? Now, this could have been a situation where, if you want to, say that there's a repeat of that situation, Aaron Glenn hired Steve Wilks so that he can really be the CEO, right? He can spread his influence throughout all three phases of the game, throughout the locker room, focus on some of these front office issues, focus on, again, kind of eliminating a lot of this waste, a lot of this poison and filth that's been just within the infrastructure for decades. Now, a big job that he's chewed off, right? I think he's done a ton of good things that aren't related to the football field, but it hasn't helped the product on the field. And a big reason for hiring Steve Wilks is that he was supposed to allow Aaron Glenn to be able to focus on what he wanted to focus on and not be a glorified defensive coordinator that's moonlighting as a head coach, right? Now, again, shout out to NJ Lauren. Ton of elite commentary all the time and thought-provoking stuff. We were having a conversation in the chat, and it was pointed out that, outside of Wilks being with the Panthers for the 5 or 6 years he was with them, he's never really been at a place long enough to build a defense and to say this was mine, and we've seen it look elite for years and years and years, kind of like we've seen with the Robert Saleh or with some of these other coaches that have been able to rise to the occasion throughout the league, right? Huge focal point, because when you think about Steve Wilks and you think about Aaron Glenn and what he's looking for, you can't honestly make a serious conversation right now that going into year 2, Steve Wilks is just a couple pieces away from being able to turn this defense around and make it look like what it's supposed to be in our eyes, which is generally a top 10 defense, right? It still feels like there's a ton of pieces that we need to add. Obviously, Quentin Williams, Sauce Gardner going away, MC2, all of these pieces have been pivotal to what we've seen in years past. And now to remake it and trust Steve Wilks, is up in the air. Now, I would personally love to see a program builder. I thought Steve Wilks' experience and specifically what he's been able to do with secondaries in the past was what was going to allow him to stay for a couple of years, and maybe he found his way into another head coach opportunity. But you can't necessarily pinpoint any point of this defense and say, I feel really, really good about this, right? The secondary, you haven't seen people rise to the occasion. I think Malachi Moore has probably stuck best to whatever the teachings and the philosophy has been, but Tony Adams has been a disappointment. You look at Isaiah Oliver, who's had the moonlight as the fourth guy, hasn't necessarily done anything amazing or wowing for us. Obviously, Andre Cisco was a huge bust, and luckily, Jarius Monroe is coming back to us. I know he got elevated during the Patriots game. I'm hoping we can maybe see something out of him, but you haven't seen the same effects as you've seen with like an Xavier Woods with him or Jeremy Chin and some of these other notable names. Secondary, right? Azari Thomas has looked good, but we haven't seen him enough. Outside of that, Jason Brownlee has had his moments, and the needle is relatively pointing up in the totality of what we've seen, but there just hasn't been a lot of those wow moments. 2 huge factors for us. 1, the only team without an interception from their secondary so far. Second, this team has lacked a ton of inconsistency, right? Or they've lacked consistency overall, but you can't piece together multiple weeks where we've looked really, really good, right? You can't piece together multiple takeaway games. You can't say that we've had a synergistic defense where the defensive line is helping feed the secondary, and the secondary is keeping up coverage to help feed the defensive line. The linebackers have all taken a step back, right? Every element of this defense has been porous more often than not from one degree or to some degree. And it just feels like one of those things you have to clean slate, right? If Aaron Glenn is going to have to walk over to that side of the ball more often, if he's going to have to take more reins, right? We've already asked about play calling multiple times, and to his credit or discredit, depending on how you feel, he has been willing to die on the sword of letting his coordinators do their job and try to figure it out, of course, with his guidance and tutelage. But you want a guy that is coming in with the scheme that he fully knows, right? The same argument with Steve Wilks that the 49ers had when they brought him over, which was, I have a scheme that's kind of in place. I want you to marry philosophies, right? I don't think Aaron Glenn had that same approach. I think they both had the same general philosophy, which is we love blitzing, we understand trench plays where it starts, and we have backgrounds in the secondary. But the team was built still from a lot of what Robert Saleh wanted to do. Wasn't a ton of blitzing generally going on in the past, so a lot of new elements, a lot of different things going on. The players didn't seem to really pick up to it that well. With that said, it's not really like Steve Wilks had anything that we can rely on and say, all right, let's just revert to what my scheme truly is, and we will start building this thing, and this is what we're going to rely on, even if we don't necessarily have the pieces. So why not start over, start from scratch, see if you can find yourself like a Todd Halfley, right? Someone of that ilk, maybe with Aaron Glenn's, again, network of resources, he can go and find someone that's a little bit more innovative, someone that is rising to the top, if you will, when it comes to coaching prospects, right? With Steve Wilks, if you took out his experience, I don't know how many people would have necessarily said he's a great fit for the job. Even the people that made the argument that he should be highly favored in terms of what Aaron Glenn should be looking to develop in his staff, it was from the standpoint that he's also hiring a lot of inexperienced coaches, and you want someone over there so that you don't necessarily have to be the guy that needs to have all the answers. You kind of have yourself a general there that can already have some things figured out. Connor Hughes has some thoughts on this as well. He said, I think there's a reason that he has been pretty much one and done in a lot of other places. That is a name to keep an eye on. I think when the season ends, that is one to watch, because the Jets are going to make changes and Woody Johnson is going to demand changes. I don't think it's going to be Tanner Engstrand. I think it could be Steve Wilks, where they step in and say, we want a new voice on defense, and I wouldn't disagree with it at all. One of the other things that I always try to key in on is I haven't heard really any reporters ask about how the players feel about Steve Wilks and the defense. As a whole, I've kind of heard guys like Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald and Quinnen and guys like this talk about the defense works. We just need to be able to, get the roles done, et cetera, et cetera. Football speak, for lack of better words. But nobody's really stood by Steve Wilks and said, this is the guy, what he's doing absolutely can be done. It makes sense. We have the skill set to accomplish it. We just haven't locked in like we have. Whatever the case is going to be, right? Whatever the accountability or excuse that's going to be raised. I've heard people talk about Aaron Glenn and their belief in him and how he could get it figured out and what he can do to turn things around and their belief in him. But nobody's really spoken highly of Steve Wilks specifically, right? And I think the best example that we maybe have of this is when Quincy Williams was, benched, and we heard Steve Wilks talk about grown men conversations being had and not really a need to expand on it too much further or, dwell on it. And we've seen Quincy respond and stuff like that. But again, I think in the next iteration of Aaron Glenn 2.0 going into 2026, I would either love for him to say, this is the scheme that I'm going to have and what I want to instill and install, and I'm going to have a defensive coordinator that feels like he can accomplish this. And, I'll give him creative, control and whatever other elements I need to acquire him. Or I want a guy that has his own scheme. He has been able to build this scheme, right? We've seen it evolve. We've seen it takes his lumps and bruises, and we've seen him also have the answers or find a quick way to remedy those issues. Or this is a gap within my defense that I understand is built in. I know how to mitigate it, and here's how we work around that, right? I want someone like that, and I don't know what that'll look like. I don't know, again, if Aaron Glenn will go the NFL ranks or college, but get someone like that within the building, right? Steve Wilks felt like always at best, maybe he was going to get 2 years anyways, whether that came via promotion or whether his time just ran out. But I don't think you have another obvious answer on the coaching staff right now. And because it's so inexperienced, I guess you can also say it wouldn't be a huge drawback to have to replace a lot of that staff as well if the DC wants to bring in his guys. But there needs to be a built-in level of consistency, I think, is what I'm really aiming for here in whoever the next hire is going to be, right? Maybe he doesn't have all of his guys right away, et cetera, but one of the things that's bothered me the most about this year is that you still have the talent, right? You still, like, Will McDonald has had his game, right? The 4 sacks. You look at week 1, he had the 2 sacks. He's had his moments where he's looked elite. Quentin Williams, he's had his moments where he's looked elite. Jermaine Johnson, still coming back from injury, not necessarily the case, but he still looks like someone that you have to account for. Quincy hasn't had that kind of game. Jermaine Sherwood hasn't necessarily had that kind of game. Nobody in the cornerback room has really had that kind of game. Maybe you could argue Jarvis Brownlee, when he first came in against the Broncos, helped get a takeaway, but nobody in the safety room has looked that way, right? You have too many players that had not only the name recognition, but also some level of pedigree coming in that haven't had some of those takeover type games. And also, just as units, haven't been able to piece together some of the performances that we've seen in the past. And that can't just be rolled off or inexcused away, right? So let me know what you guys think. If you already have some names that you would love to start considering for DC next year, let me know. But otherwise, where are you at in terms of your confidence level with Steve Wilks, and does he need another year to, add pieces to this defense and turn it into his own, or is this a situation where it was kind of set to fail from the beginning? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.